Hi everyone, my name is Anastasia López, and this is Vivien Barousse. To start with, we want you to think back to the worst interview process or interview situation you've ever had. If this is triggering for some of you, please feel free to ignore us for a little bit. Go to your happy place. Okay. For the rest, we're gonna ask simple questions, yes and no questions. If your answer is yes, please clap once. If the answer is no, you don't have to do anything. It's pretty simple. Again, think back of the worst interview you've ever had. So clap if you have that experience in mind. Okay, and after that, clap if you felt a little bit broken, confidence level through the floor. Now I want you to think back to a time where you joined a company and you were super excited, but when you joined, you realized after a very short period of time, it wasn't really what you were expecting. Things weren't what they sold you during the interview. Again, if this is triggering, you can ignore us. This last bit, we want your attention afterwards. And again, clap if this has happened to you before. And if you kind of lost confidence that you will ever find a job that will accept you or you will fit in. Sorry, I clapped. You can see there were more than one people clapping. At least it was not just me. So I can confidently say that hiring is not working in the tech industry. And as Android developers, this affects us because we are in the tech industry. We're no longer talking about stress when we go interviewing. We're talking about having anxiety. Some of us takes months to prepare for just one job interview, showing that we care more about knowledge that you can learn, knowledge that doesn't come from experience, than the actual person and how they can impact your team, your tech, your culture. So of course, why wouldn't we have anxiety if they're questioning things that we don't know, that don't come from practice? To top that anxiety, we're often at least hearing that companies only hire the top 5% of engineers of the whole world. Apparently, the top 5% of engineers in the whole world look like Mark Zuckerberg, no offense to Mark. And this is from the whole world. And this type of thinking is really toxic. It's a way of ranking people. And it's just fuel for our imposter syndrome. Because of course, we never identify like the top 5%. We feel like we got a job because we were lucky. They were having a nice day and we just passed the interview magically. It also affects diversity, because we only want to hire clones of Zuckerberg, ignoring everyone that's not like that. Reality is, my top 5% of engineers is going to be very different from Viv's, from yours, Facebook, Google, Twitter. Performance is context specific. So each company is going to have a different notion of what their top performer is, and sometimes it's not even equal in their company. So to make good hiring decisions, this is my first advice, we have to get rid of that notion. So like, shake it off. We no longer believe that the top 5% of engineers is a thing. We're not here to make your life easier, unfortunately. Hiring is difficult, and it's supposed to be. You're hiring, you're looking for your next coworker. You're looking for a company where you're gonna spend around 40 hours a week. You're gonna be working with people that you will see more than family members. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's your thing. But it's gonna be a place where you're gonna be spending a lot of time. We do think there's improvements we can do in the hiring process, and that's why we're here. Because we do think we can make it better for everyone, not just candidates, but interviewers as well. So during this talk, please think back about your interview process or how you approach looking for a job. It might be perfect already, but maybe there's a little bit of improvement that we can help you with. We're gonna go through all the process, but before we do that, we have to talk about something that affects every one of us, either interviewers or candidates. We have to acknowledge our bias. Our brains are pretty incredible. They analyze millions of data points in a second, and then they simplify it for us so we can understand it. So basically, our brain has evolved to simplify things as good or bad. For people, we simplify people in 2 dimensions, competency and motivation. So basically, a person will be a friend or a foe, competent or incompetent. And this gets decided very quickly. It makes sense from an evolutionary process, because our ancestors had to decide if that thing with teeth was going to kill them or not. You might survive not making a friend. You might not survive if you try to befriend a jaguar. Unfortunately, I'm still hoping. So this decision takes place faster than any other, and it tends to bias towards foe. Another fun thing our brain does is the fundamental attribution error. We assume that the actions of a person are because of their characteristics rather than the circumstances. For example, the candidate is obviously dumb because he failed the question, rather than the candidate made a mistake because he's in a stressful situation. And if we want to add more fun to the mix, we have the confirmation bias. When our brain has decided on an incorrect attribution, it will then look for evidence to try to prove the hypothesis. So we have the simplification of people, friend or foe, fundamental attribution error, and confirmation bias. What does this mean to us and interviewing? Well, it's quite simple. The moment you get into an interview, whether you're a candidate or an interviewer, you're going to label the person in front of you within the first minutes of the interview. And the rest of the time, you're just going to look for evidence that proves your hypothesis. And I'm not trying to make you feel bad, because it's normal. It makes sense from an evolutionary process, and we all have unconscious bias, all of us. And they will depend on where we grew up, where we ate, the weather, where we went to school, our grandparents. It's normal to have unconscious bias, but it's our job to try to understand our unconscious bias and try to remove it. When you are in an interview, try to understand how your brain is simplifying the person in front of you, and try to actually get to know the human being behind it. I don't want to be labeled just as an Android developer. I like dogs, I like reading, I like bouncy castles, so I do appreciate when people take the effort to just see me as more than an Android developer. So for our first type of hiring, we have to understand how our brain can fool us.
Now we've talked about all those biases and how hard it is to hire. It can feel just overwhelming to start hiring, to start looking for this next person to join your team, especially when it's the first time you're being put in charge of the hiring process. How do you find people to interview? How do you make sure your hiring process is fair and not biased? How do you convince the people that you want to hire that you're the right company to join? It's really, really hard. There are lots of unknowns, lots of questions, and we're just getting started. The very first thing that you need to do when you're looking to hire someone, even before you write a job description, is to look at your team and really think hard about what it is that makes people great members of your team. That will be the first step that will allow you to decide who are the kind of people that we want to hire, and will make all the decisions that you have to make further down the line much easier. So look at the team that is around you, sitting around you. Look at the people that are fitting the best inside your team, and ask yourself what it is that makes them great people to be working with. Is it culture fit, algorithmic skills, product mindset, communication skills? Like, there are lots of things that could potentially make people fit within your team. And it's very dependent on different companies and different teams. Not every team will have the same shape. So really focus on what is absolutely required for people to perform the job. Look at this sort of like common denominator of skills that everyone has already. That's the core requirement for your job. If you think of a skill that is really, really important to you as an interviewer, but someone, or 2 people, 3 people on your team don't really have that skill, is that really a requirement? Or is it just something that you like seeing in people? And then the second thing that you need to look at is the nice-to-haves. Sometimes you'll be going through a process, maybe you're rewriting an application from Java to Kotlin, and you don't really have someone on the team that has experience with large-scale migrations like this. So you may want to add some skill to this that would be nice-to-haves, things that will raise the bar for candidates applying. Something that will bring value to the team in a way that multiplies the value of your current team members. Something that will raise the bar for other great team members. So start by looking at these sort of skills that will help you do the rest of the hiring process much easier. Once we have these bullet points, we need to write a job description. The job description will be the short summary that describes basically who should apply, why should they apply, and what the job will be once they join your company. So job description has 2 goals in effect. First step is explain what the job is. What is it like working in your company? What do you expect of people? Who will they be working with? What do they do on the day-to-day? And the second part, convince people to apply. You need to make sure that in the job advert you spend some time sort of pitching the company. The job advert will be shared throughout lots of job boards. It'll be copied and pasted by recruiters. It'll end up in places you never even thought, like that job description will end up. You have to make it self-contained with these two goals in mind. Describe what the job is at your company and convince people to apply. Don't assume people will click through links. Don't assume your job description will be shared on a platform that supports links. You might have it in lots of random places. And earlier, we gathered two big pieces of information: the requirements for the job and the nice-to-have for candidates. You need to make sure that you label them very, very clearly in your job description. Research shows that, on average, men will tend to apply on jobs if they meet about 60% of the requirements, just a little bit more than half. So if they meet most of the requirements, they will apply. For women, that number is much closer to 100%. So you want to make sure that you don't start biasing that early in the process. We haven't even talked to people yet, and yet there are ways that the job description itself can bias. So let's be aware of this while we're writing the job advert, and let's be really, really clear what is nice to have, a deal break or a deal breaker. What next? Well, once we have this perfect job description, it won't get seen by anyone if it just stays in a Google Drive. So we need to start sharing it. There are lots of free jobs boards, free tools to post that job descriptions to as many sites as possible. Those are very, very great places to start, but then one thing that we try to keep in mind when we are thinking of other places to advertise our job is, where are we likely to reach out to people that have not seen our job advert yet? So for example, if you advertise on GitHub and on Stack Overflow, there's a huge overlap in the members of both communities, so you're more likely to get people seeing your job adverts twice than getting it seen by people that haven't seen it yet. So try and reach out as far as possible. Try and reach out outside of your bubble. There are lots of jobs boards for underrepresented people in tech. There are usually great places to go and reach out to people that may not have seen your job yet. And finally, reviewing CVs, everyone's favorite part of the day. So the first point of contact between the company that is hiring and someone looking for a job will include a CV. Even if you're getting introduced by someone that already works at the company, chances are the introduction will contain a CV. Unfortunately, that's the way things work. We tend to summarize people to a one piece of paper. And so how do you go through CVs and make sure that you invite the right people to go through your hiring process? But one thing I would try to remember at this stage is that we're not really making a hire or no hire decision. Like, we're not really deciding to offer someone a job just based on a CV. So try and look at the page and just see from the experience if they are likely or not to meet the different requirements that we drew up earlier. It doesn't have to be a 100% fit. We're not at this stage, as I said, trying to make them an offer yet. There's still quite a few stages. We're merely deciding whether it's worth going for a phone call with them. So that's a good place to start.
On the other side, we have the candidate that has decided to apply for a job or has to apply for a new job. If they're anything like me, they're probably feeling overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, and scared as fudge. Their imposter syndrome might be through the roof, saying like, you're never going to find a job. Why do you even bother? And it's normal. I know I'm not alone. We all feel it, or most of us feel it, because it's a risk. You're getting out of your comfort zone. You're taking a risk. You're taking a risk, double risk. We need to acknowledge that. You need to calm down and think, this is normal. This is part of the normal human behavior and part of interviewing. Before you start doing anything, one thing you have to absolutely do is figuring out what you need. What do you want from your next job, of your next career move? When I began, and when a lot of us began in the industry, we feel like we have to go to every interview we possibly can and accept any job offer that we get. Going to a lot of interviews is not a bad idea. It can get you practice. Accepting any job offer is a terrible idea. You're also interviewing the company. They also have to match your requirements. So take the time to figure out, what do you need? Like, what does the company have to have? If you need a flexible working hours, then the company has to have flexible working hours. Remote work, bouncy castle, dark offices. There's a lot of things that you can figure out, and technical things as well, but bouncy castles are more important. These are some questions to help you. It's a great place to take a picture because I'm not going to read them aloud. Sometimes you leave the company not in your own terms. You get made redundant or get dismissed. And I know it's a terrible time and you're super anxious and you kind of just want to find a job and get it over with. I understand that feeling, but it won't do you any good if you just accept any company or any offer that can damage your career any further, that can damage your confidence even more. So whatever your circumstances, even if they're super stressful, and I understand how stressful they can be, take your time to understand what is it that you need from the company. Let's assume we now know what we were looking for. Now it's time to actually find the company. We will always recommend to reach out to your network first. Ask other Android developers at conferences that might be hiring. Ask them about how their job is, what their day-to-day is, what they like about their job, what they don't like about their job, what will they change? That's a very good question. Even if they're not hiring, they might have a friend or a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend that is hiring, and you can ask for an introduction. Don't be ashamed of it, because it's always a win-win. I'm always looking for recommendations, and I always follow through when people come, like, oh, I have an iOS developer, a friend that's looking for a job. I'm like, yes, send them my way. It's a win-win scenario. Besides that, we've mentioned there's a lot of places you can reach out. If you're an underrepresented candidate, try to look through these websites, because if a company is posting a job advert there, they're already taking the extra mile to try to reach out to underrepresented candidates. This is the last time you're going to see this slide. It's a very good slide to take a picture, because a lot of people ask us later about it, so I'll give you 2 seconds. Cool. Now, job descriptions. You're looking at a company, you're reading through. Job description is a great way to filter out companies that you don't want. Sorry. You can tell what a bot culture is for you based on the job description. We're all different. We all have different red flags. So you also have to figure out what your red flags are. If you don't like drinking or socializing after work, and they advertise Beer Wednesdays or Beer Thursday, or Beer Wednesdays and Beer Thursdays, maybe that's not a good culture match for you. And it's okay to not to apply to a company. It's perfectly fine. And finally, we've said it again, if you find a company that you like, apply, even if you don't match 100% of the requirements. Don't underestimate your knowledge, and don't overestimate what the company is looking for. And finally, we apply, and the fun begins, right? This is like my worst nightmare, interviewing. And we've acknowledged this is difficult. When designing a hiring process within a company, you want to make sure you find the correct candidate that fits your culture and your team. Every company is different in the way they work, in their tech stack, in their culture, in their values. Copying the process of another company, for example, Google, and calling it your own, is not going to give you the candidate that will succeed in your company. It's going to give you the candidate that will succeed at Google, but not in your company. I think the biggest part of designing the interview process is already done. The core skills we talked about before, and the nice to have. You have to design the process to figure out if the candidate have those skills that you're looking for, and which nice to have they have. If they can work in your team, if they can communicate well, if they can succeed, if they can have an impact in your team. At the beginning, we talked about unconscious bias. And as a hiring manager, it is your responsibility to make the process as fair and objective as possible. If an interviewer is having a bad day or has a bias against someone, you have to make sure it will impact the process as little as possible, because it will happen. Bad weather and rain will affect the interviewer decision. And I know it can sound a little bit overwhelming, but there are things that you can do. To start, a document. I think that every manager knows that, or that's my theory. I'm not a manager. You have to write a document. You have a source of truth. It will contain every little detail of your process, so everyone can refer back to it. This document should contain every stage of the process, how long the process or how long the stage should take, who or should or can be involved, what are the expected questions, etc., etc. Everything. Having the questions in the document will help make the process fairer and more objective and more consistent, because the same questions or very similar ones should be asked to every candidate, no matter if they're being interviewed by another person. You don't want some candidates to be asked, what's Kotlin, and other ones like, what's your favorite burger? It's not fair. It's not consistent. Another good practice is to sit down with your team and calibrate these answers. What makes a good answer and a bad answer? A rough idea. Again, it will add more consistency, because our brains might bias towards someone we liked. And if they gave a wrong answer, but we like them, we might be say like, oh yeah, they're right. So again, a document with a source of truth where interviewers can refer back to is a great idea. Another way to complement calibration is having a gradient sheet. It sounds like classmate, like teachers, I hate the term, but the grading sheet can solve 2 problems. Making sure you've evaluated the candidate in all aspects needed. It's specific to you, but it could be architectural knowledge, Android knowledge, bouncy castle knowledge, communication, whatever your core requirements are. It will also help you decide in the future, like once the interview process is over, whether the candidate have those core requirements or not, whether they're higher or no higher. This grading sheet will also, again, remove bias because it's a place for interviewers to share the candidate's answers and opinions and to remember what they need to evaluate the candidate on. Again, coddling versus burgers, you don't want that. If you have a pair programming exercise or a take-home exercise, or, well, not take-home, a take exercise on site, you also have to write down how much help the candidate needed and how fast they went. Again, our brains trick us. When we like a candidate, we feel like they answer the questions super fast, they barely needed any help. But we don't we're not sure about the candidate, we're like, yeah, they took ages, I had to help them, they dragged on for so long. But actually, they might have taken exactly the same time. As an interviewer, write it down to make sure you're being objective, to make sure your unconscious bias is not being triggered. As a hiring manager, make sure you're sharing these numbers so everyone involved knows what's the normal. Another very important way to remove bias is to have a diverse set of people interviewing throughout all the candidates. For our case, this means diversity of experiences, ethnicity, gender, age, and role. Junior developers can, and I would say should, be involved in hiring. They just need to be onboarded correctly. They will be meeting their future coworker, and especially if they're a senior developer. If you went to Lara's talk before, you know that senior developers will have to share their knowledge and will have to talk to junior developers. So if a candidate cannot communicate properly with a junior developer, they might not be a correct fit. Diversity of ethnicities, gender, and age. Age, we do have an ageism problem in the industry. And the same with ethnicity and gender. For me, it's the biggest red flag ever. After 5 hours interviewing, I've only seen white men. It's a representation of their diversity. So it's a bad sign for me. When you're designing your hiring process, try to make sure you're reflecting the diversity of your team. I know sometimes it's not perfect. Maybe you only have white men, and that's fine, but be honest about it. I hate when I ask about the diversity and they tell me, well, it's fine. There's not a lot of women in tech, so it's very hard. Look around you. There's enough women and enough diversity in all these aspects to make that a lie. So just be honest about it. And finally, diversity of role. As Android developers, we don't live in an Android bubble. We talk to other developers, we talk to designers and product managers and other people in the company. So having a person that's not technical in the process is a good idea to make sure the person can communicate technical problems to non-technical people. There are a set of questions you should never, I cannot emphasize more, you should never ask. This might seem very obvious to some of us here, but given how many times I've been asked this sort of questions, and Viv as well, we're just gonna, reinforce them. You should never ask a person if they have kids, if they're planning on having kids, if they're married, if they're single, their religion, their ethnicities, their nationality. Avoid any type of questions like this. They seem that you're deciding based on the answer. And you can be triggered by your unconscious bias that you didn't even know you had. Yes, even nationality, because this might affect your judgment without you knowing. This can be asked later, after the interview, if you make an offer to make sure if they need visas or everything, but not during the interview. So never ask these questions, please. They're terrible. Okay, we've talked about how we can make the process fair, objective, and diverse. And we actually haven't talked about the process, but this is a little bit on purpose. As I mentioned at the beginning, every company is going to be completely different. So I don't want to give you a perfect process and tell you, go for it, copy and paste it. Again, it will give you candidates that will work perfectly for me, but not for your company. We will talk about the building blocks that you can use. And there's like a couple of three advices I want to give before that applies to any type of process in the interview. Try to ask behavioral questions. Behavioral questions help you evaluate the candidate's interpersonal skills, how they work in a team, how they communicate. It gives you an idea of the candidate's strong skills and the ones they need to improve. You can even ask tech questions as behavioral ones. For example, when should you or should you not refactor? It will give you an idea of the candidate's experience with refactors, which type of refactor, and the technical thingy of it. Forgot the word, but it also will give you an idea of how the candidate communicated to the rest of the team that we're going to do a refactor, and even maybe how they handle disappointment if they didn't get to do the refactor they wanted. Be careful though, because there's no right or wrong answer. You're just evaluating the set of skills the candidate has. So make sure everyone in the interview process knows what are the set of skills you're looking for. There's no right or wrong answer. And if a candidate that you like doesn't have the skills that you're looking for, try to think whether the company can help them improve that skill. Maybe it is an option. Another advice is throughout any interview process, make sure you allocate time for the candidate to ask questions. They're also interviewing you. There are no excuses for this. You can do it at the beginning or at the end. If you haven't finished doing the questions, doesn't matter. They have to have the time to ask you questions as well. And finally, try to be a little bit flexible. Candidates have different lives and they're not all similar. Expecting every candidate to have a GitHub repository with side projects or code on the weekends, or everyone to do blog posts and talks is very unfair. There's not that many that all do blog posts and talks. So try to allow a little bit of flexibility and don't discard candidates that don't fill in the stereotypical developer role. Now, building blocks. We have the phone conversations. It's just a way to try to connect with the candidate, see if they have the core requirements, but you don't have to go in very depth. This is a time for the candidate and the company to decide whether they want to invest more time on them. Take-home exercises. If you're in the panel, I think a lot of us agree with them, but there's always a conflicting topic. It will make your process shorter. It will make your process longer. And some candidates hate them, so they won't even apply, or they will just drop off. But it does give you the chance to look at someone's code without a stressful environment or someone breathing down your neck. If you do decide to do a take-home exercise, there are two things to keep in mind: time and the exercise. Don't design the exercise so it takes more than 4 or 5 hours. Every candidate will have a life, kids, religion, and probably applying to 10 other jobs. So it's unfair to ask them to work for free for more than 4 or 5 hours. And second of all, the exercise. You want them to have an exercise that's relevant to your company. Asking to build Twitter for, a language learning application doesn't make any sense. So try to design it so that also the candidate can see what type of problems they're going to be solving if they join the company. You can even integrate the take-home exercise after in other stages of the interview process. For example, you can do a pair programming over that take-home exercise because the candidate will already be comfortable with the code. Or you can just talk through the decisions they made, why they made it, how they solve another problem, how they debug it, etc. Brings us to the next part of the interview process, the technical part of the process. Usually, in a lot of cases, it means whiteboard exercises. We, in particular, disagree with whiteboard exercises 100% of the times. As an Android developer, I don't work in a whiteboard at all. I work with Android Studio that has autocomplete. It corrects my spelling mistakes. I have Stack Overflow, I have a Google, and I have a team of people that are there every time I get stuck. So asking me to write code on a whiteboard, that will not give you whether I'm good for the job or not. Even if you have deep algorithm logic that you think is essential, you don't have to do it in a whiteboard exercise. Try to make it as close as the real work environment. Give them a laptop, pair with them, or maybe if you feel they're going to be happier alone, leave them with a laptop 1 hour. I don't think there's any need to do a whiteboard exercise. So try not to make it more stressful for the candidate than what already is. Finally, there's the other bits of interviewing. There's a typical culture fit interview. Be very, very careful with this one, because usually people just see it as, can I go for beers with this person or not? And this is completely wrong. You're not evaluating whether you're going to become best friends with that person or not. This type of interview is to make sure the candidate can fit and is complementary to the company's culture. Someone that will add something and expand your cultural comfort zone. And finally, this is now up to you. You can add any other bit of process that makes sense for your company. If your company is very design focused and you want everyone to be very designy, then you can add a design part of the process. This is now really up to you. Designing interviews is hard. And there's no one size fits all, thank God, because we're all very different, companies and persons. take your time, rely on your team because they're there and they're good, and you want to feel them included. You want to make sure you're hiring the correct person that is going to join them. If you're thinking about this type of process of problems, you're already way ahead of a lot of people. Last thing I'm going to say is just remember that you're also being interviewed as a person and as a company. The candidate is also figuring out if they want to work with you. So try to be a nice person. Don't try to be a poopy person. Try to be empathetic, because being on the other side is really scary.
So as a candidate, if you get invited to a phone call, face-to-face interviews, you're probably going to have to go through that. First step, congratulations. That's already a big part of the process, is getting there. So the first piece of advice to any candidate going to interview is asking your contact at the company, the person you've been in touch with, what you're in for. Know what you will be expected to be doing on the day. So a few companies will tend to be very upfront about this and will send you a calendar invite with exact timings, who you'll be meeting, what kind of exercise you'll have. If you don't have that, it's acceptable to ask for one. Interviewers and companies, please don't keep this to yourself. Please do share it if people ask for it. We don't really want to have surprise interviews where we kind of have people coming in and we just ask them questions and they have no time to prepare. We want people to come and prepare and be ready for the kind of exercise that we're going to be asking them to complete. Another reason why sharing that ahead of time really helps is that it will help candidates prepare ahead of time and on the day for the specific kind of exercise they're going to be expecting of them. Like, no one really wants to go for a 10K in the morning straight out of bed without stretching. And it's the same for interviews. I don't want to go into an interview not knowing if I'm going to be expected to write code, because I want to write a few lines on a side project, make sure that I warm up a little bit. So you can do that. Write 5 lines of code in the morning on a side project. That will help you get into the right mindset to write code if you know you have to do that on the day. Similarly, if they tell you you're going to have to think about how you would go about designing code for an application that does something that I will tell you on the day, you can start thinking about how would you design a popular application. That will really help you get in the right mindset for the interview, and it will really help you perform better. That being said, there's usually 3 broad categories of exercises for Android engineering roles and engineering roles in general that you can encounter. Hands-on code, systems and architecture design, and culture/behavior question. For hands-on interviews, when scheduling the interview, make sure that you know which language you'll be expected to write, and if you are expected to already know that language. Is the exercise going to be in Java or Kotlin? Which libraries will you be using? Those are really, really important questions. Especially for most smaller startups, usually when you interview, they may not expect you to already know the language. I used to work for a company where we would interview Ruby programmers, but we are not expecting everyone to be familiar with Ruby. We would help them if they got stuck because of language-specific issues. So ask if that's acceptable. For us, Ruby was a nice to have, not a core requirement. So we designed the interview to make sure that it would allow people to succeed throughout the process, even if Ruby was not their core main technology they were using. Then during the interview, make sure that you speak out loud. That's a very, very important part of coding exercises. The interviewer, in all likelihood, is not here just to evaluate the code that you're producing at the end. They want to see your thought process. How do you go about building this from scratch? What do you do when you get stuck with a bug and a problem? Do you ask questions to get unstuck? That's also good advice. Ask questions. If you get stuck onto something, don't let the clock run out, not knowing what to do. Ask questions, and in all likelihood, the interviewer will give you a small pointer that will allow you to move past this hurdle and onto the rest of the exercise. So that's for coding interviews. The other type of interviews will be architectural interviews, and that tends to be more conversation-focused or whiteboard-focused. A lot of the advice will be very, very similar to the coding interview. Try and think out loud, ask for tips if you get stuck. One thing that is really, really, really important for an architectural interview is ask for clarifying questions. The last thing you want to do is spend an hour, both as an interviewer and an interviewee actually, you don't want to spend an hour working on the perfect system, the perfectly designed system that just doesn't really work, doesn't really do what it's supposed to be doing. So ask lots of clarifying questions. Make sure you understand the context in which you're supposed to build this system that you're being asked to architect. Make sure that you understand what the company requires of you. And a lot of the time, these architectural questions won't be that much about good or bad answers. I mean, there are lots of bad answers, but there's no good, perfect answers. It'll be about the trade-offs that you make along the way. It'll be about what you're willing to sacrifice in your architecture to be able to get the benefits of a technology that you're using. So keep that in mind and ask for clarification. And again, think out loud. That will really help you make sure that you're going down the right path. So for example, you could say, we need to build this application and we need to choose a library to implement an image display logic because it's really hard to do manually. We're going to have lots of bugs, so we might as well use a library. I would use probably Glide for this one because it supports GIFs and we can have cat GIFs in the future, and who wouldn't want cat GIFs in their Android application? But also, one of the downsides of Glide is it's quite heavy as a library, and so I'm assuming that the size of the output APK is not a problem. If it turns out that for the purpose of the exercise, APK size is a problem, you'll get that feedback very early on, and you'll get a chance to course correct before it's too late. In some cases, as I just said, we try to discourage companies from doing this, but you will be asked to write code or consider lower level concerns in architectural interviews, something around algorithms and data structures. As interviewers, we really don't like them, but they tend to happen, so it never hurts to brush up on the sort of common algorithms, common data structure that you could use on the day. That tends to help a little bit as well. And for behavioral interview, that tends to be mostly about your ability in dealing with some scenarios in the past. There's no common set of questions that you tend to get asked, but it will be more around how do you deal with conflicts, how do you resolve disagreements, how do you make decisions, how do you explain technical decisions to the rest of your team. So it's not really questions that you can prepare for and have answers ready, but you can try and think about these sort of situations that have arisen in your experience in the past that will help you make sure that you have the right memories available to you that you can build on the day when they ask you these questions. So try and think ahead of time. When's the last time I pushed for a process change onto my team and the team got on board? How did I go about pushing for those changes? When's the last time I had a strong disagreement? How did we resolve it? That's the sort of questions that you're likely to encounter. And finally, some tips that are common to all types of interviews and that we usually do when it's our turn to find a job. Ask all the questions. Remember that you are interviewing the company. These are a few questions you want to make sure that the company is here to support you into your personal growth as well. Remember that you are interviewing the company. As Anastasia said the other day during the panel, they have to impress you as well. You're not just here to impress the company. Ask all the questions, and if something really, really matters to you, don't shy away from asking. Do you care about diversity? Ask them about the diversity of their team and what steps they're doing to improve it. Do you care about the ethics of data storage? You can ask that. I asked a healthcare company once I was interviewing with how they dealt with the safety of the data they were storing about their users. How do you make sure that developers don't snoop around private people's information? How do you make sure that when we build features, we just use the data that we already have in ways that are aligned with the values of the company? You can ask all of these questions. There are very, very few questions that you can't ask a company. At the end, you might accept an offer from this company and spend 5 days a week working with the people that are here, that you are meeting today on that interview. So make sure that you ask of them all the questions that you have. And the last part, making a decision. So once all the interviews are done, now you need to make a decision. Both the company and the candidate, you have to decide whether you want to move forward. As a company, try and get everyone involved in the hiring process into a room as quickly as possible to make a decision. I know it's really hard. Like, the interviewers tend to be the senior people that have lots of meetings. It'll tend to be managers that have lots of meetings as well. It's really, really hard finding a slot in a calendar, but it's really unfair not to do that very quickly. The candidate on the other side will be wondering what's happening while you're making the decision. Speaking of the candidate, make sure that you tell them when they should expect an answer as well. It will help them make sure that they don't stress too much because they haven't heard from you yet, and also gives you a deadline. That can motivate as well to make sure that that decision happens sooner. When you try and make a decision as a company, try and write your thoughts very early on as well. Anchoring bias is very, very subtle and can be very, very powerful. Just imagine you're walking into a meeting to try and talk about the interview, and your boss's boss or your boss's boss's boss says, this is the best engineer I've ever interviewed. I would be really, really annoyed if we don't hire them. And you thought, actually, his code wasn't great. Like, are you that likely to share that concern again? That's anchoring bias. You want to make sure that you have your thoughts clear and you don't let other people's opinions influence you. And then everyone gets a chance to explain the decisions as well. You have to give space to people to explain why they thought one way or the other. As a candidate, take the time to take a step back and think again about the interview and how you felt. Again, you might have to go back and start on Monday. So really, really think about what you liked and you didn't like about the company, how you felt during the day. Did you get that weird vibe from one of your potentially future coworkers? Did you get interviewed by a wall of white men? 10 people, none of them women? Or did you have to go through like a whole day of interviews and they didn't even give you a lunch break? That happened to me once. It's not great. And you may have to end up working there. You want to make sure that you'll be happy going back and working with the same people in a similar situation. Sometimes the company will decide not to make you an offer, and that sucks. We've all been there. We've all interviewed for companies and not got an offer at the end. It's heartbreaking. Your imposter syndrome will kick in. You'll start feeling like you'll never find a job, that you're the worst engineer. Like, it happened to me so many times. It's really, really heartbreaking, and you really, really fell down for a bit. But try and keep your head high. And there's so many reasons why the company might decide not to make you an offer. It does happen for a lot of reasons, not just technical skills. So keep looking, keep interviewing, and hopefully you'll find the right place for you. On the other hand, maybe you will end up with multiple offers, and then you will have to choose a company to work with. And very often it'll be a compromise. So try and think about what really, really matters to you, what you thought early on about what really, really matters to you in terms of jobs. Because very often you'll have to figure out what is the most important to you. Is it working in a small team? You may have to compromise on salary. Or do you really, really want to work with Kotlin? Chances are you may have to help the company move their legacy Java application towards Kotlin. So it will be a compromise, and you really, really have to know what you want. And it's never too late to keep asking questions. If you realize you have a question you didn't get a chance to ask early on in the interview process, email the person you've been in touch at the company. Very often, a company might even invite you back for coffee. You'll have a chance to chat with your future boss. That's always great. Ultimately, it may sound cheesy, but hiring engineers is not that much about technology. It's a lot about people. And whether we are like in this one meeting room trying to figure out who's going to be working with us, who are we going to work with in the future, whether you're the interviewer evaluating someone, the hiring manager with the boss asking, when are we going to find someone? Or you're someone looking for your next job. Like, it's all big decisions. And we're all trying to figure out in less than a few hours who we're going to be working with next. It's really, really hard. As we said at the beginning, there's no way to make it easy, but hopefully we can make it a little bit nicer. Good luck finding your next coworkers, and thank you very much.